Hi, and this is the FLIA PFAL podcast. So I'm here with 4 members of PFAL 10, PFAL standing obviously for the Program for African Leadership, and this is our 10th cohort. This has been a completely virtual year, and thankfully towards the end of the year we were able to meet up. So I was approached by Aliyah, who's one of the PFALers, who said there's a lot of conversations they've had over the year about different things, and it would be amazing to just have a platform to talk to one another, to share, and maybe get other people plugged into these conversations. So I'll let Aliyah say more about the idea, and we'll get started.
Okay, so I think this idea was basically born out of the fact that I've met so many people, interesting people through the PFAL program and at the FLIA, through the Africa Summit, and a lot of the conversations we have about being young Africans at the LAC, living in London, are often isolated into social spaces, and but they remain relevant to Africans beyond just these same social spaces. So I wanted a platform to basically share those conversations, have them, share them, allow people to listen to them, learn from them, and contribute to them. So I invited a couple of the interesting people that I've met, including Mubarak on Zoom, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we'll have a chat. Cool. You want to start, Roberta?
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Aliyah. So my name is Roberta Chisubi. I'm from Uganda, and I just completed my Masters of Science in Health and International Development, and I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today. Yeah.
My name is Elizabeth Legesse, and I just finished my Masters in Gender Development and Globalization, and I'm also very excited to be here and to continue these conversations.
My name is Abbas Yusuf. I'm from Nigeria, born and raised in the UK. And I study comparative politics.
Mubarak, do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Mubarak Aliyu. I just completed my Master's in Development Studies with a specialism in African development.
My name's Alia Vayez. I just completed my Master's in International Relations, and I'm from South Africa. So I think a lot of the kind of conversations we've been having have often surrounded the idea of African identity, specifically from a young person's perspective. One, in a conversation where we've shared lots of experiences at LAC and in London. And I think a good starting point is to ask you, how has your experience been at LAC this past year? What has stood out to you? There've been I don't have to tell you that there have been a lot of ups and downs that have happened, whether within the academic program or also just in the context of the pandemic. But I'm here to hear from you guys.
Okay, I can go first. I think I will definitely begin by saying, even though it has been a very tricky, I think I speak for lots of people when I say that I am very grateful that I actually was able to come to LSE and pursue the degree, especially in the pandemic, because obviously this is an opportunity that lots of people would love to have but don't get the opportunity to have. I think it has been very, very tough. I think especially being away from home and with COVID as well. I mean, I'm sure it's been the same in you guys' countries as well. Second wave, third wave, you're worried about how your parents are doing. So it definitely has been tough, navigating school, even with all of that going on. But I think LSE has been very supportive. I do think, of course, being an African at LSE does come with an overwhelming sense of responsibility as well, which is definitely something that has added to the pressure, in that I think you not only want to do well for yourself, but you, I guess, have an overwhelming sense of feeling the need to, to give back and to ensure that this investment has been paid back. So I think I think I speak for most Africans when I say that probably adds on to the pressure of being at such a top performing university as well. But you do your best to navigate it. You make connections like in the program for African leaders, and you just keep it pushing and do your best. But it has definitely, I think that element of having to give back as an African student, being very privileged, especially being in the minority at LSE, has definitely, made it a lot tougher. But, thank God for the support systems.
I think I've spoken to Abbas about the giving back aspect of it. Can you tell me your experiences?
Sure. I mean, My experience at LSE, I came in with a plan. So I studied law at undergrad. So studying politics was a whole shift in itself. So before coming to LSE, I was in Nigeria for 2 years. So I was able to like see how things were locally, politically and business-wise, in the legal sense as well. And I think I said to you yesterday that the plan is not to be a savior, but it's to contribute to what people are doing to make the nation or nations in sub-Saharan Africa better. So I picked my modules in light of what I had seen there to see and learn about how I can contribute to what's going on back home. So I'll say that my experience at LSE was incredibly enriching in an academic sense. I'll say socially it was amazing as well. We met people all across the continent. So yeah, I think for me it was kind of good. It was really good.
And similar to that, for me, I think I found kind of the epitome of my LSE education in PFAL, because it was a bedrock for so many, revelations, but also kind of showed me how to navigate my way through LSE in an academic space, and kind of gave me the comfort and the confidence that I needed, being surrounded by so many Africans who were navigating similar kind of, at times, maybe very tense times where you feel like you're a native informant, but also you're trying to learn and you're trying to absorb as much as you can. So I think finding that, PFAL for me was very much of like a comfort space that I needed. Yeah.
It's very encouraging to hear. I feel like I have to put a shameless plug in. And I think it's very nice to hear how you guys have been able to form a community and within the program for African leadership, especially because you guys only met on Zoom, and then every now and then when you had your projects, you guys would meet in the library if you could, but still going through a cascade of COVID testing and just winter in the UK, stuff like that. So for anyone who wants to join PFAL, I hopefully anyway, when it goes on to PFAL 11 and 12, like people will actually be able to come back together in a sense. But also I think there maybe is an aspect of the online element that maybe would have even worked years before, because as you can imagine, I'm sure at times it might have felt a bit overwhelming to people, like university this, and now you have to be in this lecture room for a PFAL leadership lecture, whereas you kind of just could go from a lecture to just opening your laptop and engaging. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I don't know if it's your shared experiences or what actually made you able to connect, even though it was computer screens, like it was just screens.
I think it's just like the similarities in the courses or anything like that.
I think that's a large part of why I wanted to have this type of conversation, is because we've met either at random because of particular PFAL events, or the Africa Summit had a lot to do with that, but also it's just the similarities, the fact that you're many times, Mubarak and I have spoken often about this, how you can be in a classroom at LAC and be not only the only African, but the only person from any kind of developing context. And when you meet other people, in a sea of as a minority, you kind of hold on. You hold on tightly, because there's a shared, there's just understanding in the space. Whether our countries are very different, our upbringings are very different, but you don't have to explain certain things. But I wanted to go back to what Elsa said, which was really important, and I think Mubarak can also speak to it, is the kind of duality of feeling like a native informant, or being that mouthpiece for the whole of the global south, or the whole of the developing world within this context of LAC. But then, having to pick up on the responsibility of, okay, I need to take in as much as possible without giving too much to the context, because this is not our end goal, right? Mubarak, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes, we had this conversation with Aliyah last week about being kind of representatives for the so-called Global South in a lot of LSE courses. Even though my department, the International Development Department, is a bit better in that case, I've definitely been in particular courses where I felt like the only person from either an African country or from the developing world who has to kind of represent And I think one way I tried to deal with this as much as possible was to ground myself in a lot of Africa-related programs within LSE. So from PFAL, sorry about that, from PFAL to African development courses. I think also taking those courses helped me a lot.
You know, in those courses, and I know that you both have done things to do with African development or development in general, and how this institution, or at least, yeah, how this institution has begun to talk about it, talk about development in Africa, and how they've begun to teach other, you know, particularly European or Western students about it. What was your experience in those kind of spaces, being like, oh, well, I know what that's like. I know what that issue that we're talking about is like, because I've, you know, I have direct ties to it.
It was definitely a lot of, first of all, at least in my context, it was a lot of seeking either African theorists from the continent in order to better explain, considering that this is my first time in a master's degree, and it had to be, okay, I don't have the vocabulary for it. I know I've experienced it, but I need kind of like a developed vocabulary to try and understand it. So for me, I found myself trying to seek a lot of authors and, I don't know, just theorists from the continent, and having to navigate that, and then trying to present that also to the respective like departments, trying to kind of showcase, okay, this is being done in the continent, it's being worked on, it's just not coming through Western, right? But it's also not coming through a Western mode of knowledge production that it was completely excluded from. So it was, I found myself like in a war of, I don't know, just like tugging at trying to find things that relate to me, but also again and again trying to present it in a way that this is more than valid to be in the syllabus, in the context of any of the work.
No.
Sorry, Roberta, go
Should I
ahead.
Okay. No. I fully relate to what Elsa said, and I think I kind of felt that, say, whenever I was doing presentations and even just engaging in class, I think I always so I did my undergraduate degree in South Africa, and I found that a lot of the time from my African development courses and my politics courses, the lecturers exposed us to a lot of African material, writing and content from African authors, which wasn't necessarily the case in some of my LSE classes. So I kind of found that I think whenever I did presentations and things like that, I felt the need to, like, you know, highlight other amazing authors, say like Dambisa Moyo or whoever that's, you know, talking about the same issue, but are, you know, actually African. And I think at the same time it began, I think, to get a bit overwhelming as well, and that I felt like a certain sense of like responsibility to either, you know, if going into class saying that, you know, this person says this and you should know this and this should be said. And I think I had to try and find the balance between, like, you know, of course, you know, contributing, but not feeling the need to kind of be the spokesperson for Uganda every time, you know, I walked into a classroom, which was a very tricky rope to navigate, because at the same time you want to show people that, you know, there's so much to give, but you also kind of, you know, have to understand that even you you're here to get an education, and you're also here to, you know, to learn as well, and you shouldn't feel the need to, you know, compensate for these things, especially when most of them are very structured as well, and it's beyond your control. But I mean, it was great because there were a couple of people in my course that, you know, kind of were like, came over to me and were like, oh, I didn't know this, thanks for sharing and all of that. So even if it was tricky to navigate, and I think that's maybe partially, I think, I don't know, call it a sense of responsibility, but it's one of those things that you take on when you come into an institution where you're in the minority, and it's tough, but I think it does have its benefits. And if you kind of want to make a difference, these are the things that, you know, you sort of inadvertently have to take on without realizing, and, you know, you just learn how to navigate in a way that suits you best.
Mubarak, you had something to say?
Yes, which is actually related to what Roberta just explained. We're in the same African development course with Roberta, which I think is probably the best example of a proper decolonized curriculum, decolonized syllabus at LSE. where we understood that, in fact, even when African scholars talk about these issues, and when as African students we're in these institutions, we kind of develop a white gaze, right? So we're taught to look at these things from the perspective of the European or the Western world. And part of a huge part of our struggle is to be educated in this kind of institution while trying to decenter that white gaze. And like Roberta said, saying there's a lot to give, but at the same time, trying to keep the values of what it means to be African. So there is a lot of contradiction and conflict that goes on when we study the basic things that I think the average student wouldn't understand. And I think part of the experience is trying to navigate this sort of double consciousness, right? And it's not always easy. But yes, I just wanted to bring attention to this kind of contradiction that exists within the academic space too.
Because I think I think what Mubarak is talking about, and what you all have touched on, is really the crux of a lot of our conversations, is the fact that being African really means you're juggling a lot of different things. It is the push and pull, or the tug of war that you mentioned. It is the double consciousness that Mubarak mentioned, and it's not just in the classroom. You know, we've all experienced it in social spaces in London, you know, in museums in London, just in the international context where your identity as an African prefaces a lot, and it's heavy sometimes. What were you about to say, Roberta?
No, sorry, I was just going to take us back a little bit. I think I will definitely say that I think even with the double consciousness and everything, I will definitely commend LSE for the decolonizing academia engagements that you know they have had. I know obviously it is a process, but I think I've kind of felt like, at least with some of my lecturers, when I say raised issues about a lack of diversity in the reading lists, they were willing to, you know, they were willing to listen. And I guess even the existence of the Firoz Lalji Institute as well is a testament to the fact that, you know, even if it's still tough, there's like, you know, there's like many strides that LSE is making.
Going off the backs of what, you know, what we've been kind of dancing around in this conversation about, whether it's articulated as a double consciousness, whether it is a tug of war, or just the fact that, you know, young Africans are juggling all of these things, I want to ask you kind of to really give us a personal perspective of, you know, your experience of that juggle, of that balance, and more specifically how it's begun to frame a lot of your, you know, the next steps of how you're beginning to look at the continent now, not as a student, you know, in these educational spaces, but as a professional that has capacity now to contribute, to give back, to however you kind of want to articulate it. Yeah.
I think it's going to be very interesting for me, at least, in the sense that I need to hold myself back from thinking that I've been educated in the West and that I'm going to be going somewhere in Africa to work and to kind of offload everything that I've learned here. And so to try and take off my white gaze in that aspect, in terms of, yes, I've received a fine education from a very prestigious school, but also there is education there about that context that is just as valid, if not more valid. So I think that's what I'm really not necessarily struggling with, but I'm trying to kind of shed off that white gaze from which I've had this past year, and kind of going into it, kind of trying to marry the two in a way that's going to be helpful to me and the communities that I will be in or will work in.
Abbas,
so basically like how I'll take my experiences from LSE going forward,
essentially.
Yeah.
And I mean the specific experience that we've been talking about as being an African in this context.
I mean, so with regards to being an African at LSE, in my whole course, actually, I'm the only black person, let alone the only African.
And what's the degree?
Comparative politics.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a study of politics across time and space. Mind you, we study Africa as well, but I'm the only black person, right? And I mean, it's been interesting because maybe I've said some controversial things, but these are things based on my experience. And some of the lecturers have, questioned some things that I've said. So, for instance, like the resource curse, right? Someone said, oh yeah, the reason why many African nations are the way they are is because they're rich in resources, and this leads to corruption, and so on and so forth. And I said that actually, that's a wrong way of seeing it, because there are many nations around the world which are rich in resource and they're doing relatively well. The UAE, Norway, and so on and so forth. And I said that actually, it's the way of doing politics. We have to look at the way in which we do politics, right? That's the way that influences what we do with resources, not the resource influencing the way we do politics. And the lecturer was a bit bamboozled. And then I gave him my thoughts on democracy, especially European liberal democracy, and I said that we cannot just copy and paste it to Africa. And he was outraged. He was like, are you saying you don't believe in the ballot box kind of thing? And then the conversation was toned down, and he understood where I was coming from. But yeah, I mean, as Roberta has alluded to already, it feels like you're almost a spokesperson for the whole continent. And I definitely felt that way at times in my course. But to be honest, I think it's something to be proud of. I don't think we should shy away from responsibility if we truly want to contribute. And I think we should be very proud of our backgrounds, irrespective of the space that we find ourselves in.
I did actually.
Go
With what you were saying, Elsa, I wanted to, which is, so I'm moving to Ghana now, so it's a thing that I've kind of been thinking about. As much as you think to yourself that you want to shed your white gaze, how do you think that will be received? As in terms of, you said that the knowledge there is also obviously as valuable as the institute that you have gone to and you've gained knowledge from. But in terms of actually collaborating with people, even if you're actively focused on shedding your white gaze, they also might still view you with a white gaze because you've been educated abroad and this and that. So I guess none of us will know, but what kind of, maybe I'm saying issues or kind of challenges do you think you'll face in terms of, no matter how much you're trying to change yourself, you're kind of still going to be viewed as a person you went abroad, so you think yourself.
And I think for me, after my undergrad, I had a year and a half of working in Eritrea, which is where I'm originally from. And it was interesting because it meant that I had to actively decenter myself from the space that was created for me because I was coming from the diaspora or because I had a Western knowledge. So it was kind of like pulling back and being in the seat that you should be in, which is I don't live there fully. I'm not well accustomed to the different struggles that people face on a daily basis, but I could come in, if I wanted to, I could have just come in and said, here's the prescription for a better this and that. So it was kind of like actively pulling away from that centered space that was given to me based on where I was coming from.
I can add to that as well. That would be nice. So born in the UK, but since the age of 6, we've been going to Nigeria twice a year. Spent the last 2 years there, so I'm there regularly. But there's no denying that I have a British upbringing as well, and I'm not going to shy away from that. I think what I can do is to assist what people are already doing there, and to acknowledge that I can learn from their experiences just as much as they can learn from mine. Nigeria or Africa doesn't exist in isolation. There are international partners, and you have to understand their ways of doing things as well. We can't just say, we're going to focus on our respective countries and do what we can to push them forward in isolation. You have to work with places or countries in the West. And I think that we have that balance to help contribute to that, And furthermore,
Go for it.
Mubarak knows that in terms of what we're doing to carry this knowledge forward, in Nigeria, we're building something called, it's still going forward, but it's called SOCA. I don't know if he's spoken to you about it.
No.
But it's not just all theory. We're actually looking to implement some of the things we've learned. So there are people in Nigeria who are part of our group, and going forward in the next elections, we're looking for states whereby we can help push candidates so that they're competitive, and actually challenge the status quo. So it's not just all theory. We're looking to really
I think I was just going to say that having worked in Uganda for a few years, I think, and working in development spaces as well, sometimes I think I've noticed that people coming in from the West who have received a Western education have feel like they have, I guess, a certain kind of legitimacy and superiority. And I think for me, one thing I'm definitely taking away from LSE is that, you know, even if I have gone to an extremely prestigious institution, which I'm extremely proud of, it doesn't make me better than anyone else at home. And I feel like a lot of the time with aid and, not everyone, but some people working in aid and development agencies will sometimes have a bit of a chip on their shoulders and sort of, you know, undermine staff that have worked in Uganda and lived in Uganda and studied there.
Okay, so just to kind of briefly answer Julian's question as well, I think this balance between removing our white gaze and the ones that Africans might have for us since we studied in Western institutions, I think the key is to kind of treat the recipients sort of, or Africans, as like knowledgeable people as well. So we're exchanging ideas with them, not necessarily just giving them ideas. We're not trying to save them. We're trying to help them save themselves, if that makes sense. So, and I also think as far as, for me, I always speak from the field of development. I think if there's anything I've learned at LSE, it's that organization is really important. So I think we must always get organized and work with others when we're trying to achieve like a particular plan, rather than going in alone and individually trying to save people. That's all I was going to say.
Thanks for that, Mubarak. I think it touched on a lot of what everybody said in different ways in terms of not only what our capacity is right now, exiting not only the, you know, our physical degree experience, but also just the experience of gaining this white gaze or being in this international context. But also I think it's very, what I think, you know, we can have many more conversations about is what we're actually doing to contribute going forward, what are we contributing back to the continent, and how we articulating it. Like I know many in each of your responses there were words like save, there were words like assist, there were words like help, but and those will, you know, in that particular context, I'm sure there'll be challenges, but I think going forward there should be more space for us as young Africans to talk about, you know, that the navigation of how exactly we're going to contribute this Western knowledge. And, you know, the fact that we have different accents, the fact that we have a different frame of reference within these professional spaces going forward. And I look forward to having those conversations with you all in the future. So I think finally I'm gonna ask you all for kind of one or two sentences as concluding thoughts as to what you hope these types of conversations will give to other people, whether it's the incoming PFAL cohort or the incoming, you know, small percentage, unfortunately, of African students coming to LSE and coming to London, just in general, in this international context. What are your bits of advice, words of wisdom in hindsight?
Shall I?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, well, first of all, you're not alone in your thoughts, and you'll find that there are many people who think or have similar thoughts to you, and the need for continuity. So for us to foster stronger relations between us, as opposed to having various cohorts that are doing their own thing. Remember and reach out to people who have been there and done it, and can build on what you seek to do.
Yeah, I know it can be very tiring at points, but I hope that incoming students or anybody is bold in their presence as an African student in the classrooms in these academic spaces, because it's so important that when you ask these uncomfortable questions, there's something that's going to come out of it, and it's just going to be like this never-ending change of little bits of change. Yeah.
I think just two things going off of what these guys have said. Number one, there is value in community, so go out of your way to seek and build relationships with fellow Africans. It'll definitely make a world of a difference. And secondly, just because you're in the minority, don't feel the need to have to prove yourself, because by virtue of you being here, you are enough, and you don't have to feel like you have to go over and above just to show that you're worthy as an African. Yeah.
Mubarak?
Yes, I was just going to say that also context matters. So a lot of the knowledge that you gain from here has to be contextualized. And we know even within African countries, context matters itself, depending on what community you go to. And I think we must avoid viewing everything we learn in relation to the West. We have to try to contextualize to our own experiences as much as possible. So you have to view yourself as a creator of knowledge as well, not a recipient. And I think there's a lot of power that comes with seeing yourself as a creator. So you should value that a lot.
Wow, I wish I heard some of these things before I came to LSE, because I think my last word is really just to is going off of this conversation, is that asking the question, having the conversation, not being afraid to do so, because you can gain so much from everybody you meet is a resource. We all come with such rich experiences and a rich willingness to learn and to listen. And I hope this podcast going forward is going to be a space that promotes all of these bits of advice, because I think essentially what our conversation today has shown is that we've got a lot of agency in the space, as particularly as Africans, and I think it's time, if not now, more than ever, to use that going forward.
Thank you all for your amazing contributions, your amazing thoughts, especially those last words. And going on the first thing that Roberta said, I meet so many people when it gets to around April or May times who kind of like, I heard about PFAL, but I didn't think I would have enough time. But I think nothing is worse than, not having community. There is so much value in community. It makes so much sense. So I would say, even if you think you'll be overwhelmed, one of our groups, they told us that they were a bit overwhelmed. So they took a short break during the time that they were in PFAL. And there's that support. It's not like pressure, you have to do these things. But for these people who have never met each other before and probably wouldn't have met each other if they were just doing their degrees. Shamelessly plugging PFAL. I've never studied at LSE, so I'm the Program for African Leadership Officer, and just being able to facilitate what's going on here is just so fantastic. And join PFAL.
Yeah,
Thank you.